Welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon, and I'm the host of a Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present, and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. Hi, everybody.
And welcome to the podcast. In every episode, we try to bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips and techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. It's all about helping you develop as a professional where you make the choices that affect you in your classroom for the betterment of your students. We hope to open some doors for you as you make those choices. And welcome newcomers. We love having new teachers coming on board and joining our Facebook group. And today we have a topic that we've wanted to do for quite a while, Sharon. It's on poetry, isn't it?
Yes, we have. We've intentionally chosen this topic because poetry is across the Australian curriculum. So it's an integral part to it. And teachers will often talk to me about, I've got to do a unit of poetry, what do I know about poetry? I'm going to, maybe do some of the forms of poetry that we do many of the times. They're often our sort of fallback position. But we want to bring poetry, like we think that, it's really a piece that's part of a writer's toolkit, is to know how to express themselves in a way that is tight and, I want to use the word simple in a way, that's catching that thinking. And so we think, poetry is that tool that can really give power to our writers and to our thinkers. So we think poetry is important enough for us to explore over a few podcasts. So this is actually going to be one in a series of podcasts on poetry that we're going to do. And so this first in the series, we're going to be today we're pretty excited. We're bringing you a poet to get you to be able to gain some insights into the power and the purpose of poetry in our lives. And so in a question and answer format today, we're going to go inside the experience of the reader and the writer of poetry.
Yeah, because we sometimes as teachers, we can teach a unit of poetry and we're just going to explore even more effective ways of...
and how poetry exists across our lives, not just in a unit. Yeah. And
we found it even with our own kids, it helped them with their reading when they were starting to read. It's got that rhyme, repetition and rhythm. And I know it's an amazing support for students beyond learning to read. It goes way through school.
Yes, reading and writing. I think it's, it's contained in both. It teaches us the language, it teaches us, and it's emotive. It, really creates feeling and allows us to express thoughts deeply.
Often best heard or read aloud, to hear the musical sound, the rhythm of our language. Everything really... Someone said everything children need to know about reading and writing exists within a poem. To appreciate poetry is to appreciate the art of our language. Anyway, we'd like to introduce our special guest today. We're very lucky to have Paul Kelly, a singer, songwriter and poet on our podcast. Now, Paul is an Australian rock singer, songwriter, guitarist. He's performed solo and led numerous groups, including the Dots and the Coloured Girls and the Messengers. He's worked with many other artists and groups and written a number of books. His music style has ranged from bluegrass to student-orientated dub reggae.
Studio, maybe.
Sorry, wrong word. But his core output straddles folk, rock and country. His lyrics capture the vastness of the culture and landscape of Australia by chronicling life about him for over 30 years. David Fricke from the Rolling Stone calls Kelly one of the finest songwriters I've ever heard, Australian or otherwise. Kelly has said, "Songwriting is mysterious to me. I still feel like a total beginner. I don't feel like I've got it nailed yet." So welcome, Paul.
Hi, Phil. Hi, Sharon. How are you going?
Yes,
Yeah,
great.
good.
Thank you, Paul. Great to have you here.
Thanks for the introduction.
And also I was going to say we're kind of related because our grandmothers were sisters. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
We are second cousins.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, as I know, family appears a lot in your writing.
Yep.
Yes. Well, we come from a big family, big clan, and I'm one of 8 kids, and it was pointed out to me a while ago that children and that my songs often have even love songs, which you might think would be just woman, man, or 2 people. There's often more than 2 people in the songs. Children appear quite often in my songs.
Yeah.
Where are you in the family? What number?
I'm a middle child.
Ah.
I'm number 5.
Right.
So right in the middle there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you've got stories from both ends of the family, because being middle child, you've got stories of the older ones, and relationships with older and younger.
Yeah. I think it's quite a universal experience for someone with older siblings that they get heavily influenced by them, and that was the case with me with all my older siblings. I remember that the 2 oldest were girls, or they were teenagers when I was younger, and they were starting to bring music into the house. This is the early 60s, so
yes,
Beatles singles and Normie Rowe and Peter, Paul and Mary, and then later on Bob Dylan, and then my brothers. I had 2 older brothers as well, and got lots of music through them. Moving through the 60s, and obviously Beatles, Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, and then later on into more prog rock like Moody Blues and Pink Floyd and Jethro Tull. So a lot of music and influences came through them, and also pertinent to our subject today, poetry. There's a book of poetry called The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, a Lebanese poet, and that was a sort of the book that everyone was sort of that generation. I think by then the early 70s, when I was about 15 or 16, was sort of very popular, and all my brother Martin and John and their friends were all reading that book, and that was sort of I first became. Well, I was getting interested in poetry at school, but that was the style of Khalil Gibran was a sort of style, because it was free verse in its translation, and it was sort of in a way easier to try and imitate. I started writing poetry before I wrote songs, and so my first poems are sort of a bit like very bad Khalil Gibran.
Yeah.
But interesting that was a style that you connected with then, that, because I know you you talk about Shakespeare was certainly one of the early impacts, I guess, through school.
Yeah, I think with Gibran, it was there's a lot of ideas that are really sort of really interesting or important to an adolescent, and thinking about moving away from the old structures and traditional ways of doing things. So Khalil Gibran was, one of his most famous poems was, "Your children are not your children; they are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you." So it was a real parent-child sort of a philosophy about parents not trying to control their children. And so that resonated a lot with me, as it did with a lot of people in that generation. Shakespeare, I already got through school, and it was I guess it was the language and what you were talking about before with poetry, that the language and the variety and richness and all the internal rhymes and but poetic nature of Shakespeare's speech. I mean, his plays obviously didn't some of them, some lines rhymed in his plays, but they were written in verse. But they also had great stories, so I guess that hooked someone. We did Macbeth at school, and that really sort of hooks. That's the kind of play that hooks teenagers in. I think it's got everything: sex, blood, betrayal, revenge.
Yes, all wrapped up in this rich world of
horror. Horror, violence.
It's amazing these guys that lived hundreds of years ago still speak to us today, like going right back to Homer, or and you've also, because there's a whole lot of poems out there, and it's hard to figure out where to find good ones, I suppose. And you've written a book that's got a whole collection of poems, which is a way of people navigating, getting into good poems. And I guess there'll be some poems that even in your book they'll connect to, and other ones they won't connect to. But as you say, it's all about trying to be exposed to as many poems as you can, and then going with the ones that you click with. Is that what you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really good approach. I think, for some reason people they think poetry is difficult, or they feel afraid of it, or they think they're going to feel that they don't understand it. And I think if you approach, it's a good way to approach poetry is that most of the poetry that you come across, most of it may not resonate with you, but it's just some will. I mean, some of my favourite poets, W.H. Auden, the English poet, is a good example. I mean, he wrote lots and lots of poetry. Most of his poetry doesn't really speak to me, or it can be quite, in a way, opaque. And that's true a lot of poetry, because it's rich language and compressed language. It's dense language, and it's often symbolic. There may be it may not reveal its meanings to you or speak to you in any meaningful way. But you shouldn't. That's not to worry about, because you're going to find you may find another poem that jumps out at you, and that's my experience with, say, someone like Auden and other poets as well. I would call him one of my favourite poets, but I would probably only love less than 5% of his poems.
So you don't have to labour over a poem because you think you should know it. You just skip to the next one that really clicks with you. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's why anthologies are useful too, because they expose you to a range of poets and voices, and if you like something, you can then maybe follow up a particular poet. Even when you don't sort of you get down on yourself for not really getting that poet or understanding a lot of their poems. It's just I mean, sometimes you I think often a great poem you couldn't paraphrase the meaning of it, but there's something about it that keeps drawing you back, even though you're not quite sure what's going on in the poem. I think good poems you come back to them and they keep
revealing things.
Keep revealing things, yeah. And I also think it's important not to try and. I think I also think maybe why people do get put off poetry is that it can be taught in ways that where the teachers will say, what's the meaning of this poem, or what is the poet trying to say? And I think that's the wrong way to approach a poem. I don't think to sort of paraphrase the meaning of a poem is in a way sort of just to destroy the poem. To me, it sort of it reduces the poem. I mean, the poem exists because that's the only way to say. It's just saying it's a thing in its own right. It's not something to be summarised. I mean, I think definitely teachers can help students enjoy poems by pointing out some of the things going on with the way the rhymes and the rhythms are working and the questions that the poem might be posing. But I think going at it from the point of view, what is the poet trying to say is sort of perhaps giving the wrong view of what writers do. I mean, I think most writers don't know what they're doing until they're in the middle of writing. I mean, for a lot of writers, a lot of poets, writing is a way of thinking. It's not like you have the thought and then you try to express it. You don't even know what you're doing till you start the poem. You're just going with an image or a sound or a rhythm, and then the poem starts, writing itself with the writer involved, but it's sort of never quite knowing what they're doing.
So it's about letting the kids experience the poem themselves in their own way, even if the teacher's just reading it out loud in an expressive way. Then the students are getting their own meaning and their own connection with it. Is that more of what you'd think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
yeah.
I think reading aloud is really important too. I think saying it aloud makes you start to notice things more than if you're just reading it on the page.
Yeah.
Yes, as a reader, I have to say that is, I can't read poetry just in my head. I find that I have to be reading it aloud, even if I'm reading it for myself, because it is it's in saying it that meaning actually comes to light to me. That it's there's
something about the sounds, isn't it? You're hearing the sounds and the rhythm, so it just adds another dimension to it that you're just not getting. I was trying to read some this morning, and I found myself wanting to read them out loud just to make them mean more to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think I love your point about. I absolutely agree that I think it's easy for us to kill the joy of poetry for our students, when we sort of move into that analysis rather than or saying this is what it means, when I absolutely agree that the question really is, what does this mean for you? Because everyone will bring their own meaning to it, and that doesn't make one person's meaning right or wrong over anyone else's.
Yeah. And also you don't even have to find meaning. Sometimes you can just enjoy a poem for the feeling it gives you, or enjoyment of the sound and the richness of the language.
Yes.
I mean, Shakespeare was. I mean, Shakespeare. I really first, got hooked on Shakespeare at school through Macbeth, as I said. I mean, that's a slightly different thing because it was through a play, which is telling a story. So you do need to work a little bit at the language to sort of work out what's going on. But as you do, you become more and more. You can dive more and more into the language.
Yes.
So
go on.
What is it about poetry that just brings, as opposed to reading a novel or whatever, is bringing everything into a sharp focus, isn't it? That it's bringing thoughts into a more dense focus, so that you hone in on things. Is that part of it?
Yeah, I guess I think one way to sort of define poetry is that it's memorable speech, and that's really how poetry, I guess, it first arose. I mean, before the invention of writing, people were telling stories, but they weren't writing them down. Just like Homer, for instance, and the way to to keep the stories, to be able to tell the stories and pass them on, was for the stories to be in a way that could be remembered, and
Yep.
all the techniques of poetry are really often memory aids, whether rhyme or rhythm, certain number of beats or syllables to a line, assonance, or the words sounding the same within a line, all those things that make a story easy to remember.
Yeah.
That's poetry. So,
little kid.
So I think that's why our first literature, they call it literature, but it was the first literature, I guess, that humans were doing was poetry, because they weren't writing it down, so they had to find a way to remember it. It's much easier to remember a poem than to remember a long piece of prose.
Because we talked about little kids, when you read aloud to a little kid and it's all in a rhyme and a repetition, and they remember they might not be able to read the words, but they're remembering it in their head, and then as they get to know that book over and over again, they start to read the words, because
that's right.
Mm.
The memory's already there. Yeah. Yep.
Actually, whilst we're talking about little ones, are there, like in your childhood before Macbeth, I'm guessing there were nursery rhymes and songs that were part of your poetry experience as well, that lived in your memory?
We had poetry, like a children's book of verse. Maybe it was.
Yes.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
They're still around. I think those. The Owl and the Pussycat, and James Morrison, Weatherby, George Dupree took very good care of his mother, though he was only 3. So,
Paul, that's so funny. Like, that's the one that just rolls off my tongue too, from A.A. Milne. That's one of my favourite. Right. Yes.
Poetry and stories as a kid. I remember mum and dad, reading stories out loud, sitting on dad's knee, having stories, and then learning to read, wanting to read learn to read myself, so I could just read. That's a big part of it.
Yeah.
And so then you started to be a writer of poems and songs. And that, having that wealth of poems behind you, has that helped you to write in the better ways, or is it that because you love collecting poems too, don't you? And that is that helped in your writing?
Oh, I think so. I think I think it's fairly basic and fairly simple. It's like a sports person, or anybody wants to be who's good at something has to do it a lot. It's like training. If you want to be a writer, you need to read. You need to read a lot. By reading, you start picking up, I guess, technique without even knowing it. I think a good way to learn something is to try, is to learn someone else's work. So if as a songwriter, I learned, when I was starting out, I learned lots of other people's songs. So it's still something I do as part of, I do it for fun. I learn if I hear a song I like, I try and learn it, or I go back and learn old songs, and go back and remember the first, because sometimes, unless you keep playing a song, you forget it. So you go back and review or revise those old songs I used to play. So it's influenced a lot by folk music and country music and so on.
Does the poem come first or the song come first, or it depends?
The lyrics or the music?
Yeah, lyrics or the music. Yeah.
For me, generally, it's usually, for a long, long time, it was mainly music first. I would sort of sing like sounds into a tape recorder. It used to be a little cassette player. Now I do it into my phone. It's much easier. Well, about the same, but just so it's maybe sitting at the piano or the guitar, which is the two instruments I write on, and just fooling around with some chords, and then starting to sing things over the top. It's usually just sounds. Maybe there's some words, a phrase or two gets attached to it.
Yeah.
And then often it's sort of like finishing a song is just getting words to fit those original sounds, or I might often have the whole shape of a song without having many words, and then getting the words to fit, like finishing a puzzle.
Oh yeah.
But that was my way for a long, long time, and then it was fairly recently, about 8 years ago, I was involved in a collaboration with a classical composer, James Ledger, putting poems to music for a student orchestra, ANAM, the Australian National Academy of Music, and we put poems to music, and that became a record called Conversations with Ghosts. And after that finished, I just started putting, I just kept going, putting poems I liked to music for fun. And that was a big change for me, because before that I'd always thought it's hard to start with all the words first because it would make the music too
restricted.
Rigid. Restricted. But I was completely wrong. This actually.
Oh, interesting, isn't it?
I was completely wrong. So
for all those years. Yeah.
So the very first thing I did after that piece, Conversations with Ghosts, was I put a Shakespeare sonnet to music, the very famous one, Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day, Sonnet 18.
Yes.
And then I thought, I can put a sonnet to music, I'll try a few more. And that sort of led me to doing a record of Shakespeare sonnets. And just led to me sort of, as part of the way I write, sometimes starting with someone else's words first, or then also that influenced my own writing. So I would sometimes, I've started to write words first more often than I used to. So now I still often write, I guess what I would call the old way for me anyway, was just, singing sounds into a tape recorder and then getting words to fit. Yeah. I still write that way, but I also had this other way of having the words to start. So that was pretty exciting for me, because, after being songwriting for about 40 years, then to find not that long, maybe 35 years, then finding a new way to write songs, that's
opens up a whole new world. Yeah.
I mean, that's all that any writer would ever ask. Every writer, I think, has their own habits and grooves, and to be able to sort of shake that up and find new ways to write is what every writer is looking for.
Yes, yeah. So another whole exploration of you as a writer.
Yeah, and also, having these, when you have these poems, there's a beautiful set of words to start with. I mean, you've got you've got more than half the job's done, because I think words are the hardest part of writing songs. I find melodies easier to write than words.
Which is why you would have gone in, with the music first, which is what you were doing, music first, and then find the words to fit with that, because the part that flowed the easiest.
So is writing poetry a hard gig to get things right, do you think?
Well, I never said, but I wrote poetry. I guess I thought I was writing poetry when I was started when I was about 15, 16, and then for a few years I was writing poetry and sort of prose poems, and then I started to play guitar and learned songs, and then 21 I wrote my first song. So I didn't really write poetry from that point, except as lyrics for a song. So I didn't think of them so much as poems, but as song lyrics. But it's all part of a spectrum, and again, the original poetry way back in history was most of it was sung. So again, that's a way of remembering something. Yes. So at some point, poetry got divided from music and melody and the whole tradition of just poems just to be read. arose. But the roots of poetry go back to song. So I guess song lyrics, can be a form of poetry. But sometimes a song lyric works in a melody in a song, but it doesn't really work that well on the page. It doesn't have much going for it unless it's sung.
So you've actually spoken and sung some of a collection on a YouTube series. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I had this idea last year because I do like memorizing poems. It's something I do for fun, and I like saying them out loud. And I've become more involved in putting poems to music, as I said, over the last 7 or 8 years, and then putting the book together, Love Is Strong as Death, the anthology.
Yes.
I just thought it'd be fun to do a series of short films saying poetry, not reading it, but actually performing it like I would perform a song. I don't go on stage with a book of my lyrics or with a music stand and look at what's it's all in my head. So that's the way I like to carry poems in my head. I carry my songs in my head because that's I sing them. That's my job. So I thought,
go on. Sorry.
Yeah, so that's simply it. Just to perform the poems. So we did a series of poems that we released over. We started late last year and then continued into this year, and grouped some of them together. There was some Shakespeare sonnets went together, and then some poems around certain themes. So we just shot them in a very, very simply in a studio with nice lighting, and they're all up on. I think you can find them on YouTube.
Yes.
Paul Kelly speaks and sings poems. I think it's something like that.
Yes.
You've found that, haven't you?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're all, and you can see them all there. And it's through the Wheeler Centre.
Wheeler Centre.
On YouTube.
So teachers and probably older students would find those.
Really?
Or any students, really.
Yes. And that you've performed the poems. It is. It's that recitation. It's that that performance that isn't always something that our students get a chance to do. So I really love them as the way that you've done them, very simply, as you said, but good lighting. But to actually do that performance of a poem that you love or that speaks to you or that you just like the sound of, I think is something that children really, here's a story. So one day this last week, I asked a little boy in year 2 what kinds of books did he like to read and what was one of his favourites. And he said, well, actually, my favourite is a poem. It's The Man from Snowy River. And I said, how did you get to know about that? And he said, well, somebody read it to me and then I wanted to perform it. So as a 7-year-old, he performed at assembly The Man from Snowy River. Now, that idea of being able to perform something, even if it's not our own words, that we can perform the rich language of somebody's, I think is a real joy and a real something to add to students' repertoires.
The Banjo Patterson, they're great. I mean, that's a great poem, and so vivid, full of action, and the rhymes are so infectious and fun. I like him a lot.
Yes.
Fancy the Overflow. I remember it's a great one. And one of my older brother, the one just up from me, John, often would perform The Man from Ironbark.
Oh yes, yes.
Yep.
as you know, say at family get-togethers, we might get different people might get up and tell a joke or do a song or say a poem or a trick.
Yes.
So John's go-to poem, the Man from Ironbark, and he would still acts it out when he does it. So we always request that one.
Yeah. So I love that you've got those poems up there. I have thoroughly enjoyed viewing those and seeing the art of poetry performance. And, I think that's a great thing that we can bring to students, that they can access that readily as a way. And as we said, whatever age students are, because listeners here will be working with, early, young children through to secondary students and some beyond. It's great to be able to see how a poem can be performed. And just on a teaching tip here, a couple of the teachers that I'm working with actually offer a few times in the year, get their students poetry performance ready to not only to perform to the class, but to actually record it so that parents get to see that as a recording. So, we need audiences for these things, and it's great to prepare ourselves for those sorts of opportunities, to learn something for that reason.
Yeah, and I think perform poetry, spoken word poetry slams. It's become more popular in recent years, and there's people are discovering the joy of going to see someone perform a poem.
Because we really need that joy in our lives. After that pretty tough year last year, with COVID and everything. The whole role of poetry in our society. There's some bigger things there that can really nourish us, aren't there? Do you think, Paul?
And I think again, although people sort of think, oh, poetry that's difficult, or they might be a bit scared of it, it's actually in their lives a lot more than they realise. I mean, people turn to poetry at a lot of our ceremonial occasions. Funerals, people will read a poem, weddings, big birthday parties. Often friends will make up a poem about someone for a special occasion. We do it all the time. I mean, it's rhyming things or writing poems or writing things in a rhythm that starts to move people's bodies and heartbeats. It's fun to do, and I think so. I mean, poetry can do all that. It can be great fun, also great solace at times when we need comfort, or reflection, like at funerals and so on. They're because they're pithy, and they're often, they don't have to be too long. They just say something that articulates your feelings in a way that you can remember and respond to. So it's all around us.
And it's been happening for thousands of years, so they knew they were on a good thing back then, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
And prayer, I suppose, is a form of poetry too, isn't it? Religious poems, or
Yeah, very much so. I mean, you could say it the other way around too. Poetry is a form of prayer, which that the root of prayer is praise. So a lot of there's a lot of poetry is praise, and there's especially there's so much great nature poetry that praises. I mean, we did Jared Manley Hopkins at school, and you probably remember him, Philip, going to a Catholic school. The Christian Brothers loved Jared Manley Hopkins. He was Catholic priest.
Yeah.
But an incredibly innovative poet, very pioneering in his use of rhythm and rhyme. And Pied Beauty is a great example. I mean, God's Grandeur, those poems, they're just pure songs of praise. The Windtower, about which is a kind of hawk or kestrel. They're just poems of praise. So they're very much like prayer. Often you can't separate poetry and prayer. So they're mixed together. The Psalms in the Bible and so on.
I really like how in your collection of poems, but as you're talking now as well, that really there's such a variety of poems. We can get into thinking, a poem is this or that, but the more poetry we read, the more patterns and ways of organising and, free verse through to, how we shape those words on a page, different metre, different literary devices that are used, that the wealth and the richness and the range, that if, like in a collection that you've done, like that covers a lot of different forms and a lot of different styles, a lot of different techniques and devices.
And the more the kids are hearing of these different poems, many of them, as you said, Paul, before, they're going to be picking up things within their language that they don't even realise they're picking up, which then they can use in their own writing. So
that's right, and if you like, you can often, a way of writing something is actually to respond to a piece of writing that you like. I mean, often you do that subconsciously, but it can be a conscious act too, is to say, I really like the rhythm or the metre of that poem or that rhyming scheme. I might try to do something the same, So, or you can write a poem in response to another poem, or almost like an argument or a different point of view, or just take a poem as a starting off point for your own poem. And I think that's probably a way that teachers can have fun introducing that element of make a game out of this.
Yeah, it's playing with it rather than over analysing it. You're just having a lot of fun with it.
And experiment. Yeah. Experiment, try out, adapt.
And your love of poetry, even though you were, you must have still, the schooling you had still enhanced it. It didn't reduce your love of poetry. So you must have had some pretty okay to good experiences at the school with poetry, but also you grew with it afterwards.
Yeah, I think it was definitely. I enjoyed poetry at school. It was the first time I came across John Keats and Ode to a Nightingale. It said we had Jeremy Hopkins. We did Shakespeare, and I had a good English teacher. So remember Brother Siebert.
Oh yes,
and so I don't know if everyone enjoyed English as much as I did, but I liked it, and I found, those three writers I mentioned, Keats, Hopkins, and Shakespeare, they all had a real, very rich and in some ways sort of elevated language. It was, you wouldn't call it sort of plain talking poetry. It was more, it's poetry that sort of really was reaching for something, and you had to put a bit of work into it. So I enjoyed that if you put some work into the poem, it would reward you.
Yeah, and it takes you to another level, does it? Do you think? It's sort of a.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, a good poem will change your way of being, or will change. It'll change it. I think a really good poetry sort of affects you physically it gives you, it gives you a kind of buzz, I guess. It sort of makes your head fizz, or your hairs go up on the back of your neck. So I think good poetry has a strong physical effect.
Yeah. There's one earlier on you were talking about some of the first poetry writing you sort of had a go at was the free verse poetry. Now that's like something that often comes up, and teachers will often say, "Oh, free verse poetry." Like, what's an example of free verse poetry? How would you define free verse poetry? Like, if you were to describe it, because as a writer do you still write free verse poetry, or not so
not
much?
really. I'm not really. I'm a bit sort of hooked on rhyme, but that's partly because being a songwriter. But even if I wrote poems for fun, or little poems for friends or for an occasion, I usually make it rhyme.
Yeah,
I like haikus too. They don't have to rhyme. So you see, that's those, and they're. I think they're fun for students to play around with, because you've just got this little rule, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables, and try and write something within that. Is so it's good having that little. Again, it's like a puzzle. Can I get these things to fit and make this thing? You've got certain boundaries that you've got to follow.
Yes.
That I think.
Makes it
I don't know how to define free verse. 'Cause I think, you look at something on maybe poetry on a page, and you don't see obvious obvious rhyme or meter. But so you say, oh, that's free verse. But if the poet probably had there's a rhythm in the poet's mind writing that. So again, you start speaking the poem, and you find there are rhythms in there. So it's not prose. Sometimes people say derogatorily, that free verse poem is just prose chopped up.
Right. Yes.
That's, I think, a good poem is not that. It's doing other things, and often the way to discover it is by saying it out loud.
I like that, and I like how you said about the haiku. Those little pieces that where there is it's like a puzzle to solve, and I think children, especially children, often it's the way for them to surprise themselves about the way they can put words together. That it's not going to be in the same way as when you're writing a sentence, or you've just blaring something out on the page. That this puzzle to solve, the way of arranging the thought, is a way that they don't get to do very often. It's like,
and they can get that satisfaction of I got this. I got the 17 syllables.
Yes,
in the right way, and then also it's not sort of. It's also a way of sort of. Sometimes when you distract, you sort of playing with a form, or and then so you're not too worried about. I have to say something serious, or I have to express my feelings, or you just think you're actually just trying to get words to fit this form, and then whatever. Yeah. It allows the subconscious to work a bit more, and of course you'll write up without even knowing it. You'll write about things that maybe are on your mind, or you didn't even know were on your mind, but they come up somehow. But if you start off with, I think that's, again, I mentioned it at the start. I don't think most writers don't sit down thinking, I have this thought and this feeling and I need to express it. I think they just start writing, and then the thought or the feelings start to emerge.
And that subconscious that you're talking about, I think that's where poetry can really, that's where it delves in, isn't it? That it goes into that subconscious level more than maybe just our everyday writing.
Yeah. I think those.
Sometimes we have writing with our kids where we say we're going to give you a quick write where you've got 2 minutes to write things as much as you can, and we might even give them a key word, but that seems to sometimes bring out their subconscious as well. It's kind of if it's done in a problem-solving way, it's kind of another constraint, isn't it?
Or without overthinking.
They're not overthinking.
I think it's a good thing to do. Yeah, I thought I could do, which is again because it's a fun one. It's a poem called "The Magpies," written by a New Zealand poet called Dennis Glover, and I came across it and it's decided to put it to music. But it's a poem with sort of an old-fashioned poem in a way. I think it might be written in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
But he's written down in a sort of phonetic version, his version of what a magpie sounds like, and he's written on the page. He goes, "Quaddle-doodle, addle-waddle-doodle," the magpie said. So I thought that'd be fun to sing.
Yeah.
I remember singing it when I didn't know the poem. It's not that well known here, but I sang it in New Zealand, and it's very kids used to study that poem at school. So It's a very well known poem over there, where the magpies actually there's a lot of magpies there, but they were introduced, so they're not native like here.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
But, New Zealanders love magpies too. Well, I guess not all of them. A lot of people here.
Those
like magpies.
Those that have been swooped.
Yeah.
or haven't been swooped.
I'm just going to move my phone down so I can play the guitar, and I'll have a go at this.
All right.
The magpie.
Fantastic.
When Tom and Elizabeth took the farm, the bracken made their bed. Quaddle-doodle, addle-waddle-doodle, the magpie said. Tom's hand was strong to the plow, Elizabeth's lips were red. Quaddle-doodle, addle-waddle-doodle, the magpie said. Year in, year out they were, while the pines grew overhead. Quaddle-doodle, addle-waddle-doodle, the magpie said. But all the beautiful crops soon went to the mortgage man instead. Quaddle-doodle, addle-waddle-doodle, the magpie said. Elizabeth is dead now. It was years ago. Old Tom went light in the head. Quaddle-doodle, addle-waddle-doodle, the magpie said. The farm's still there. Mortgage corporations couldn't give it away. Quaddle-doodle, addle-waddle-doodle, the magpie say.
Oh, love it. That's great verse. Great poem. I'm ready to chase that one up straight away. And iconic Paul Kelly sound on that. Oh, how beautiful.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul.
And Paul, this idea of you having, because I think from your the poems from your book, Love is Strong as Death, have you put some of those to music as well?
Quite a few. That one's the Magpies is in the book.
Right.
And over the years, because over the poems that I put to music over the years, obviously they're poems that I really love, so they were all in the book. There's actually an index at the back of the book that lists all the ones that I put music to and
that's right.
what records they're on. And the audio book has got 14 of the poems recorded at the end as well. Just their new recordings, just but vocal and guitar, just me solo. So they're available on the audio book, but nowhere else.
All right. So the audio book has those 14 songs. Well, the music
at the end.
At the end.
Yeah, the audio book is me reading the whole.
The whole book.
I read the whole book.
Wow.
Oh my!
I just read the whole lot, and then put these 14 songs as a extra thing at the end.
Oh goodness! I'm going to say this is one time where, well, I can easily fix this, but I regret having the hard copy version of the book and not the audio version.
Oh, get both.
That's what I'm saying. I need to have
both.
I most definitely will be chasing up the audio of that. So Love is Strong as Death. There'll be plenty of people chasing that one up. In fact, I was speaking to someone today who is a great admirer of yours who said this is a book that is, strong on there. It doesn't sit on the shelf too much, but they have brought a lot of those to the classroom, a lot of your poems to the classroom.
Oh, that's good.
Yes,
good to hear.
yes. Yeah. And I think it's, as we said, that it's that variety, and it's a place for us to go exploring, so that we too can come across some poets that we may not have been aware of either. There's certainly some poets here that I did not know, of the poems that you've collected in here, that has certainly made me go looking further. So
yeah, I think that's the good thing about. I mean, that's anthologies helped me a lot too when I was putting my anthology together, because it's like you say, it's all that variety. You look through someone else's collection of poems, and you'll meet old friends, poems that but then you'll just make new discoveries, and that's sort of what I wanted my book to do, for a place where people can go, that they come across some old favourites, and then they discover new poems and new writers, and then they can go off exploring for themselves. So I want the book to be able to open up, open up more and more as you get into it.
Yes, yeah.
And more people are listening on audio because with busy lives they're hopefully listening to more podcasts, but also the audio way, driving in the car or whatever is a way for them to access that when they don't have as much time for reading. So it's great. Yeah. Really
and back to the anthology. Sorry, I keep jumping around here, but also I think it's having access to anthologies is just such a great model for students too, to think about making their own collections. That it isn't just something that I might hear a poem every now and then, but to actively be a collector of poems, of the poems that I love, of the poems that I've heard but I don't yet understand, but there's something in there. There's something that's
even from a young age. Yeah.
Even from a young age, yes. We often talk about our younger, our receptions ones having collections of nursery rhymes and songs and things that really lead them into reading those for themselves, and maybe performing them. Certainly sharing them, because poetry isn't just an on your own piece all the time. It's when you can share that with somebody, I think that's that strengthens. Doesn't mean someone else has to get the same things from it as you, but to share, to share either through performance or the things that I've found that I love, I think it's just a great way for classroom communities to build too around the whole notion of language and big thoughts.
Love of language.
Being brought together.
And it's easy, where we now have, in this day and age, it's much easier to do to, as you say, maybe collect your favourite poems. You know, you can jump around and you know, Google an author that you like and find their poem. Even if you can't, even if you might not be able to get to the bookstore or to get the book, physical book, but there's poetry that you can. I mean, that's how I sort of started putting this book together. I mean, for years, if I liked a poem, I came across a poem somewhere, or I'll just collect it, cut and paste it into a document, put it into a folder. So I guess it all started, the way I put the book together was just having lots and lots of poems that I put on my computer and put in a folder, and it's like started to build my own collection. So, and again, like you said, much easier to share things these days, to send things around to groups and exchange poetry. A lot of, again, with my anthology, it was also helped a lot by friends and people I knew sending me poems.
Yes.
Or you might exchange poetry, or someone sends you a poem and that you've never heard of the poet, and off you go exploring that poet. So all that's much easier to do these days than hunting around in bookshops. As much as I love bookshops,
it must be
go to bookshops a lot. So.
Must be so many poems that are in other languages that we've not even heard of, and if they get translated, then we discover a whole new round of poetry out there.
Yeah, there's so much out there.
And I guess the other thing I was just thinking too is that I love that you've married poetry with music, and for some children that is another way for them, they would really engage with that, thinking, putting a favourite poem or something that speaks to me to music. And then some children love to be able to illustrate, and have that poetry, with their...
With an image,
Yes.
Or act it out as a drama.
Yes, or to perform it in a way. Yep. And so it just opens all these doors for multiple levels of expression, which I think is really, is joyous, that it, adds real meaning to, not that you have to do these things, but when you can find new ways to express these things. And I think, as you said earlier, poetry is there to make us, or to help us feel things. I think that's, at the end of the day, that's the difference about poetry is it does activate feelings.
And thinking.
And thinking, without a doubt. Yeah.
Now, Paul, I thought we'd ask some rapid-fire questions at the end here. First one is, what was your favourite book as a child, and why is that your favourite?
Oh, I remember the Little Prince by the French writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I'm probably not saying that right, but that was just a strange, beautiful book. I think I liked it because of the drawings. He drew a boa constrictor with a elephant inside it, and then all the adults only saw that it was a hat, and so this is how he worked out whether people, had true vision like he did. It's a strange little book, but I think I remember really liking that book, even if it, I didn't fully understand it or all the allegories in it. But I remember that one.
So it brought a lot of intrigue.
A lot of intrigue, yeah.
So was that a book that was read to you initially?
I can't remember. I think possibly may have been, but then I remember reading it on my own too.
Yes, going back to it over and over again.
Yeah, I think it was probably read to me at first. Yeah.
And that's what good read alouds will do for us too. It's like, now that I've entered into that world through there, now to keep exploring that and to revisit and go back to, which is something that we haven't even really talked about with the poetry, is that, of course, that's what there's great power in poetry, is that the revisiting of it. So, yeah.
And then if you memorize a poem for fun, that's something. Then you carry it around with you. So
yes,
it's something you can always access. I mean, it's easy to access. It's much, again, like I was saying before, so much easier to access poetry now. So you think, what was the line? What was that poem? I remember that line of that poem. I can't remember the name of the poem or who wrote it, but I remember this line.
Yes.
You just type in the line and bang.
Yeah, and there it is. I know, it's extraordinary.
Yeah. Unfortunately, potty isn't meaning we don't memorize stuff in the way that we used to.
No. No.
I mean, I remember visiting Auntie Pat, Phil. My Auntie Pat in the last years of her life, because she lived to 97, and over the last 10 years when I'd come back to Adelaide and visit her, we mostly would just read or say poems to each other, and she could remember a whole lot from school, because when she went to school, they learnt poems by rote. She just learnt the poems by rote, and that rote learning went out of fashion, but I think there's something good about it, because it just means that she had the poem with her always.
Yes.
And a rich vocabulary within her she always had,
To draw on. Yeah.
Actually, I love the way you expressed that once we learn it, we carry that with us. And, we could say rote learning, or I just love that image of, that's what we carry. We don't only carry it, it actually becomes part of us.
It's probably a better way of saying is learning by heart. That's a much friendlier way of saying it than rote learning.
Yes.
By heart.
Learning by heart. And listen to the meaning in that now.
Yeah.
How many times have I used that phrase, you learn something by heart, but when you really think of what that means.
Yeah. Whole new meaning.
Then, right, that's back. Right, we've just made that's going to go viral, Paul.
Now, my rapid fire questions aren't very rapid.
Sorry.
My second question, doesn't matter.
That's because I'm in the room.
How do you think you learnt to read, if you can remember?
I don't remember. I can't. I don't actually remember. I can read now. I thought must have been pretty young.
Yeah.
And I remember being told the story of my dad that he could read. He could read by the age of 3, and he used to go and because he could go get the newspaper, the newspaper would be delivered, and he could read the date and the weather and the headline, and that was sort of the famous family story. Dad could read when he was 3 years old,
so we all have to.
So there was the benchmark.
But I don't remember. I just
did your mum?
I'm sure it was probably learning. Probably got pretty close to reading by just being read to at home.
Yeah,
and then
was that your mum mostly, or do you think, or dad?
Both. Yeah, mum and dad. Yeah.
Actually, you said. Oh, sorry, I've just lost my thought. Keep going, Phil.
That's
I'll come
all right.
back to.
No, it's great. A favourite song or line from a song, and why?
Well, yeah, there's so many. I think Waterloo Sunset by the Kinks. I think that's a gorgeous song, musically as well. But the lyrics are so vivid, and the lyrics. He's one of those songwriters where you can see his songs. They're very visual, cinematic, I'd say, and it's got the great image of people like flies swarming around Waterloo, swarming around Waterloo Underground, the Waterloo Underground station in London. People like flies swarming around Waterloo Underground. So that always stuck with me, that song, that line.
Perhaps that's another book, a collection of songs that you like. Yeah. That's,
yeah.
Well, yes. Well, you mentioned in your anthology that was going to open another whole area if you included songs. If you included songs as poems.
It would get too big. I was already the publishers were saying, stop, enough.
So does that mean there's Anthology 2 coming?
No, don't know, not at this stage. No. But it's funny, after, I've had lots, of course, ever since the book came out, then I come across a poem and think, I wish I had that one in the book. Or I think of a poem I forgot, and then, of course, people come up to you and say, why didn't you put this poem in? Of course, I started another folder on the computer with I just, I like a poem, I sort of collect it, so I put it in the folder. I've got quite a lot now outside of the book.
And isn't that the joy, that the book is done, but you can keep collecting, and I think that's just so indicative of how much poetry means to you, and how collectible it is, that it can be just an ongoing piece for any of us. It's, what speaks to us, we like to hold in our heart.
Some people collect china cup of, crockery or china sets or little figurines or, I don't know, racing cars.
Guitars.
Now, Paul, you've been really successful in your career. Have you got, although you say you don't feel like you've got songwriting nailed yet.
Well, maybe you do now.
Yeah. But
it goes back to what I was saying before. You don't really know what. Yeah, if I knew how to write a song, I'd write one every day. But I don't. I mean, you sort of got to turn up and just play. It's a form of play. So you've got to make sure you give yourself time and space to play, and then and hopefully songs will strike. I mean, it's a bit like fishing. You don't know whether you can go fishing at the same, you can go fishing, spend the whole day fishing and don't catch a fish, but that's all right. You still have a good time. But you keep going back, and maybe on the, one day you go and you catch a fish. Yeah. But you wouldn't have never caught the fish unless you turned up, unless you went fishing. Yes. So you've got to. Yeah.
So is that your tip for youngsters would be to have a go and to keep fishing, keep getting in there and trying out and going along your passions, and would that be your any other tips for younger students?
For what? Thriving.
I think
thriving in a career that they want to go into, I suppose. Or,
like I said before, you just read a lot. If you find poems you like. Maybe have a go at writing something similar, or like I said, writing a response to it. Or, I learned to write songs by learning lots of other people's songs. I think that's just the key to anything. You learn by. It's a form of worship. Unless you worship something, you take it into yourself. And then
it's a great word.
It eventually sort of works its way out. May work its way out.
Yep. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for today. It's been really fantastic talking to you, and so many wonderful insights on.
Yes, thank you for your generosity of, letting us into your heart and into your processes in a way. Your collection, your collecting, your heart, and how you thrive through language.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure, and enjoyed the chat. And I wish you guys all the best with the ongoing podcasts.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes. So we will. I know teachers will already. There's so much here. Sometimes I think it's a bit like we don't need to analyse what you've just said. It's people. That's what we hope that. We wanted to honour your voice around poetry and about how you work with that. And, we didn't want to sort of, I think I broke the rule a few times, but I didn't want to sort of try and make too many classroom connections around that, because I think everyone will take from that what they feel is, how that can work for them as teacher and for their students.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So thank you so much. And once again, your book, The Poems, chosen by Paul Kelly, Love is Strong as Death. and I'm chasing up the audio book because I want to hear the songs.
All right.
And also the YouTube clips.
Yes.
Fantastic resource. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on our podcast. And thank you, Paul. And we look forward to hearing any responses from you on our Facebook group, also on our contact page on our website. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Paul. And thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks very much.
Sharon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.